Today is day 22 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. I want to try to do this in one part. At the end of the day, we learned that today Alessi is only about halfway through his cross-examination from Dr. Welcher. And tomorrow is going to be a half day. They'll be done around 1:30. So let's see. Day 21 had started with a voir dire of Dr. Welcher, and Bev starts today with her ruling on that. She says that Dr. Welcher can give his expert opinion that John O'Keefe was in a collision at 12:23 a.m. He can testify that his injuries were consistent with being struck by a Lexus similar to Karen Read's. He may not say that Miss Read's Lexus came into contact with John O'Keefe, and his opinions are setting the stage for argument. Day 21 had ended with the expert opinions being stricken from the record, so that's where we're picking up today with Mr. Brennan. He starts on slides 111 through 113. I just sneezed. These are the slides where Dr. Welcher is dressed up in John O'Keefe's clothing, not his actual clothing, but the similar clothing. And he's asking about the opinions about the Lexus in his arm. What evidence did you rely on? He explains all that evidence again, that huge list. Alessi objects again to that. He says, do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty on whether the damage to the defendant's Lexus is consistent with the collision to Mr. John O'Keefe? On 1/29/2022, around 12:32 a.m., he says yes, based on two potential theories. It was a glass that was thrown and shattered at it, which we have never heard him say before, or an impact with the arm. If the car was going over 8 miles per hour, it would have broken that taillight. So 8 miles is that threshold. We get into a lot of questioning versus side swipes and direct impact collisions with the car versus pedestrian. Brennan wants to know, is it uncommon in side swipe car accidents with pedestrians to see no lower body fractures? He says, no, it's not uncommon. And then he shares some examples from another trial. He has an example from a trial that he was on in LA where the person died and he had no leg fractures. He had a massive laceration to his right forearm, but it didn't break his arm. He was hit between 25 to 35 miles per hour. He had a severe brain injury, had rib fractures, and a liver laceration. So he did have some fractures. It just wasn't to any of the lower body. So what is your opinion on the absence of lower body injuries? Is that consistent with the Lexus impact of the side swipe? And he says, yes, you can have this type of impact and just have red marks. Now we get into the cross-examination by Mr. Alessi, and Dr. Welcher very condescendingly starts it off with, oh, I don't think we've met. What is your full name? Asking Attorney Alessi, and he says, Robert Alessi, and that's where you see him grinning here. Based on the cross-examination that we've seen done by Alessi and the other defense counsel, we're expecting this to be rapid, maybe more of an attack method. Alessi was not composed during this, so my notes are so frazzled. He changed topics quite a bit. He didn't follow down any sort of plan for his path of questioning, and it made it really difficult to follow. I haven't read anything based on what happens in the courtroom and the jury's reactions, but just how I was listening to it, it was overwhelming and it was very difficult to follow. So after all kinds of skirting around and weird questions in the beginning, asking what is forensics, he says, Dr. Welcher says that he gets all of the data first. Alessi wants to know how it's possible to create a hypothesis without asking how it happens at the beginning of the analysis. And he says he collects all his data first, and that's one of the last questions he's asking is, how did this happen? Alessi wants to know if he's familiar with Trooper Paul's report. He says yes, and he explains you were retained about 2.5 years after this incident. And he says, yes, it was September of 2024. And we get into some of the invoices. So we haven't really heard what the experts are paid. On November 5th, 2024, there was an invoice paid by the DA, Norfolk County, for $44,510. And he's like, do you realize that the Mass State Police has Trooper Paul, they have their own accident reconstructionists, on staff and they paid you guys to do this. There was a little bit of comment, I guess, indirect, where he said that he doesn't have a dog in this fight. So Alessi is explaining, you do have a dog in this fight, you're being paid. And we find out that the second bill, the contract was amended on April 5th, 2025, and it was $325,000. This also doesn't count the cost of the car. And basically Aperture purchases the Lexus and then they sell it, and then they bill the DA's office for any loss there. This was really contentious about this line of questioning coming up. It was about when his report was updated. Basically, Mr. Burgess, the other Aperture expert, had submitted his updated report on May 8th. He says that he received that report and he did update his presentation on May 13th. The trial had started April 22nd. So we're in the middle of trial and you're going to update your report. Why? Who told you to update your report? Because you're not supposed to be watching any of the testimony. He also says that he thought that Burgess released that second report because of new information to him. And Burgess had testified last week that it wasn't new information, it was just reworded. And that was like a whole big issue too. They take their morning break, and then he is asked if you had spoken with the Commonwealth aside from scheduling to be here today. And he says, Alessi says, how did you know to update the slide on May 13th? And he said there was the Zoom call. So he was in communication with the prosecutors. So in the last trial, we learned that the Mass State Police were actually reading the key cycles from when the vehicle was in the Mass State Police custody. And so he's asking him, have you downloaded 1164, 1165, and 1167? Have you reviewed this in Trooper Paul's report? Alessi wants to know if you were aware of this. There was a long sidebar and we really don't get to any of the answers on that, but that was a big issue last trial. Indirect, it was talked about a lot, the laceration on John O'Keefe's eye area and the wind wing on the back of the Lexus being at that height for John O'Keefe. And he says, did you keep into account the 4-inch berm? So you're assuming that he was on the same level ground as the Lexus, but what if he was in the yard or on the berm? After this, we get into so much confusing testimony. I stopped taking notes, but it was a lot of calculations to figure out the force, how much force could break a bone in your hand. I put so confusing, not Alessi's best work in my notes. Alessi wants to know, why didn't you do this test with the blue paint at 20 miles per hour? And he says he didn't want to do it, wasn't worth doing it because you only have 1 to 2 tries with the crash dummy. And he wasn't going to be hit by the car, obviously, and you really can't know exactly which angles. It could have totally skewed the data, and then we wouldn't have got the right results, and we wouldn't have been able to explain it in court. And that is the whole point. Basically, you have to do all these trials to see with the data you have what ends up happening, or it didn't happen. Alessi pulls up the spreadsheet where he says that Karen Reed reversed 87 feet. And yesterday on Direct, they made it sound like she only reversed 57 feet. But we learned that she went third 44 feet and then went back 87 feet. So it was a net of 50 something feet. And she was also going at 24 miles per hour. He says that the weather wouldn't have factored into this. And he's like, were you aware that there was a car on the street and there were people inside the house? And did you take note of all of this? And he says there was only one other vehicle. It was the Ford F-150. And he says, well, there was other testimony about a different vehicle, but it wasn't confirmed in court, so he didn't pay attention to it. The other highlight from the day was that he said that the horizontal movement causes the horizontal lacerations on the arm. And he also said that after the arm being hit, it stayed there for a little bit, and that really stuck out to me too, because how would all of the taillight pieces flown into the lawn if the arm was blocking? The judge sends the jury home, and then we have another voir dire of Dr. Welcher, and it's because he used some images from Trooper Paul in his report, and those are brought up. He used some information about the autopsy, that's brought up. So tomorrow we are going to have a half day. Court will end around 1:30, and Alessi said he's only halfway done, so we'll probably see him on Friday too.